Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We want to talk to you about the idea of reframing your enterprise approach to workplace communications. In particular, this conversation is going to allow you to have some great insights into how employee experience drives successful deployments of enterprise communications. My name is Craig Durr. I work as a senior analyst for Wainhouse Research. Now, we are a market analyst and consulting firm that works very specifically in the field of enterprise communications. You can think about the devices, the services, and the technologies that allow you to communicate with your employees, your fellow workers, to be both productive and to communicate effectively. I'm excited today because I'm having the opportunity to share with you some findings from some recent research we did in cooperation with NTT. If you follow this URL that you see available to you right now, you can actually find a summary of these in an ebook available to you. But beyond that, I'm more excited because to talk about this in person, I actually have with me joining from NTT, Adam. And I want to give Adam an opportunity to say hello and introduce himself. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic, Craig. It's really good to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to come and have a chat about the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation. So excited to be
I
here.
appreciate it is. Now, Adam is not giving himself the proper credit. The point I'm excited about this is we're really going to spend some time talking about the technology and the execution of insights that you find and then putting them into place. Now, Adam spends a lot of time in site with customers, on site with them, helping them to execute and implement the technologies that are needed to establish very effective workplace communication. So in this conversation, we're going to spend a lot of time and have some very practical insights from Adam as we go along. So, Adam, I'm looking forward to what you can share to this conversation.
I will. Absolutely. Yeah. Every day we are very busy with customers in this space, so excited to talk about it more.
That's great. Now, if you've joined us before, I actually had a previous conversation with a colleague of Adam's, Scott McMasters, where we actually talked about the process of gathering the insights, the things that allowed us to help create the strategies to move forward. If you allow me, I'm going to take a moment and recap some of the conversations that we had with Scott. And it comes back to this model that you see in front of us. So what Wainhouse did in terms of helping to formulate a better way to understand and visualize employee experiences is that we leverage an existing model that we do. Now, internally, we call it the 3Ws model, but what that stands for is workplace, workforce, and workflows. And the idea of understanding how all these interact in terms of establishing that employee communication experience. Let me tell you a little bit about them in case you're not familiar with them. They're pretty self-evident, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. The workplaces, we're talking about where people go and actually do work. Now, 3-4 years ago, that might have been primarily office, but even at that point in time, there was a point of transition where people were doing work from home environments, satellite offices, even in transit as they were working on the road. The other area that we're going to spend some time gathering insights about, what we have talked about with Scott, is around the actual workforce in itself. What's key here is these are the people that you're working with to get things done. These are the people with daily interactions, both in your company and potentially even outside of your company. And then the final area is workflows. This is the sequential process. This is the technology, the processes, the attributes the steps that you take in order to make work happen. Pretty straightforward. But understanding these helps you really understand how you can visualize what's taking place within your employee install base. And that's important as an IT decision maker. You want to be able to have a nice framework so that you can actually set up the insights that you have. Now, Adam, you spend, like I said, a lot of time with clients in their businesses, helping them deploy cloud communication solutions. Are you seeing some of these same similar areas of focuses in terms of success factors, in terms of how to properly implement this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to say, first of all, I really love what Wainhouse have done with these three things, because we see these all the time, and it's really nice to see this on a piece of paper like that. The technology we deploy hit all three: workforce, workplace, and workflows. From a workforce perspective, I think as Scott was mentioning in the previous webinar, the transformation in the last 12 months has been pretty tremendous. People have been forced to use virtual meetings more and more than probably they ever expected, and over the period of time, the acceleration that we've seen from customers into that space is something I've never seen in my entire career. It's been truly outstanding to see the levels of adoption they're getting. The interesting thing that that workforce change is given to us, though, it's also going to transform the workplace when we start talking about return to office.
Yeah.
The way we operate, the way we work has completely changed compared to where we were 12 months. And so we're already starting to see that drift in the market where we're seeing people, instead of deploying large conference rooms, which are kind of cold, kind of static, people are really relishing, I can't wait to speak to someone. I can't wait to be close contact with someone. And we're seeing the architecture and the design for the workplaces really kind of fall in line with that, looking for smaller huddle rooms, collaboration. And some of that was already in process, but I think the acceleration of this is definitely, we're going to see that impact. The one that really excites me is actually the workflows, because this is the new ground for UCC. Applications such as Microsoft Teams, WebEx, they're a complete game changer from what we've had previously. Now they're enticing organizations to bring application workflows, to bring business flows into Microsoft Teams or into WebEx, and starting to try and take the users on a different journey from what they expected. And in reality, that's where business value lies. Voice is exciting, and meetings is exciting, but business value comes from workflow optimization, and this is what those applications can really help with.
Right. I think you're spot on when you're talking about that. Actually, that's a great segue. Let me share with you, at least at a high level, some of the top line findings in each of these areas that we spoke about. When I was looking at and we were trying to understand the workplaces, I think the key question we found, and by the way, these are macro trends, and I share this with the audience because as an IT decision maker, I want to make sure you understand these macro points of view as you start honing this into your micro, very specific situation taking place within your environments. But a macro point of view, one of the key things that kept coming out, it was becoming apparent that people were challenging the why, the when, even the where they were going into the office. And there's some great examples about this that we cite within the ebook. I can bring up one or two here now just to kind of remind that. The idea of why people were going to the office. People were acknowledging they were going into the office for some very specific geographically based ideas. I have a certain person I need to meet with. I have a certain piece of equipment or a certain room, a lab, or something like that I need to go in to see. But what's really exciting is that end users were starting to acknowledge that they were going into the office to actually connect to the people, to the business, even to the brand of what was taking place. We dubbed the term hub and club in that space. People were seeing the workplace as an opportunity to connect and to also to kind of socialize. And it included everything, not only from the idea of innovation takes place in that environment or productivity, but even mentorship. Younger employees wanted to come in and see older employees or connect. It's the proverbial water cooler conversation that takes place. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing that we took away from when looking specifically at the workforce, and in particular, we just talked about the younger generation, is that there's a growing increase of we're seeing workers being motivated more than just by a paycheck. They're actually being motivated by understanding and connecting with the purpose of the business, not only of the business, but how do I contribute to it? And that's very key when you think about workplace communication technologies, because that's a key fundamental way to help enable people to think about, I matter, I understand information coming in, I'm providing information going out, I'm part of the flow of the process taking place. The last one that also took place too is the workflow optimization idea. One of the things that we were looking at was trying to cluster people by the type of work they did. And from doing that, you're able to understand what their needs are and create the appropriate governance, the appropriate digital technologies and relevance around them. Now, NTT, for example, does similar work, but I think you guys focus a lot on personas. And that was one of the key things I thought was a nice alignment from what we saw in the space to what you guys were doing practically in real life, feet on the street idea. But, as I said, these are top level takeaways, Adam, and this is nothing new to you or NTT. And I'm curious if you're seeing similar trends or similar takeaways in the businesses along the lines of these.
Yeah, we absolutely are. Kind of to my last point a little bit, there's workforce transformation, there's workplace transformation, there's workflow transformation, all happening and all at the same time. Usually it's more of a one and the other than the other. And at the moment, everything's getting put into that singular space to do it all together. I think the most important takeaway that I can recommend for organizations looking to do this is don't make an assumption that you understand your organization. Even if you've done digital transformation mapping already, understand that the market has significantly changed, your workforce has changed, your business drivers have changed. It's
Right.
always time to reset and to make sure you're still on the right path. For those organizations that haven't done that, before you get all excited about the technology, which technologists like myself tend to do,
Yeah, both of us.
there's actually a person behind that. Both of us, right? But there are people behind those keyboards, right? There are people that are trying to do their jobs, and fundamentally, they probably don't care about the technology. They care about getting their job done. And when we
Hmm.
start to think about technology and digital transformation from that standpoint, that's when we start to become successful. That's when we start to see business value generated from these transformation projects. And so that would be the recommendation that we go back to organizations with is take the time to understand what your business and what your end users are looking for, and then map that to your technology strategy.
I think that that's a great takeaway. And again, I love the practical aspects of what you're bringing to this conversation. It aligns with what we found here, that these are great areas for you to think about the macro trends of what's taking place. But the perspective that you're sharing right now is a little bit more realistic in what I want to say is going forward. Now, let's go ahead and take this to the next step. And this is where I think, Scott, I'm sorry, Adam, I really am excited for the conversation that we're going to have here. That is actually taking these insights and actually putting them into a plan that you can execute upon. Now, this is a very simple framework that Wainhouse advocates. It's a 4-step model. A lot of IT administrators would understand this plan. You start with the insights, and this model that we talked about here has gathered those insights. Then you work around alignment. And what we're talking about in terms of alignment is things like we talked about in terms of working within the guardrails of security, compliance, or the adoption measures that you have in place as well. It's basically aligning with your governance plan as a larger entity. Then we go through the preparation steps, and this is everything from doing an assessment of what you have in place to what you need to convert. We call it the keep, cut, convert. Do I keep this technology? Do I keep this solution? Do I remove this because it's not adding a value to what our new identified purpose is? Or do we convert something over? And then finally, we get to the point of execution, where this is actually making sure you have the right plan and the things like the organizational and the technology capabilities in place to put it in place in time frame. Remember, the beginning idea is that all these were driven by having and understanding employee insights, because understanding that employee experience helps to drive success in this execution. Because if you bring them along the way by understanding what their needs are, what their goals are, it helps you get to a high level of adoption as well as deployment that's taking place here. Now, this is our framework, but I understand NTT has a similar framework in place. It's very specific to cloud communications. You refer to it as the cloud deployment framework. So, Adam, please tell me more about the framework that you have in place.
Love to, yeah. Before I get there, keep, cut, convert. I love that. So I will be using that in the future, just so you know. So that's coming
good.
to me. So let me talk a little bit about the cloud deployment framework. So yeah, this is something that NTT have developed, and basically it contains 5 modules, and each of those modules is uniquely positioned to kind of address a certain element of a customer's digital transformation portfolio. Each of these modules, the intention of them is to be able to efficiently, quickly, cost-effectively audit and understand the customer's existing environment, the technological, the people, the business drivers that sit behind that, and map that, and this is the most important piece, map it to an actionable plan, something that a customer can hold on to and drive forward from. Yeah. Within that plan, the things that we're kind of talking about there is we want to talk about risks. We want to talk mitigation plans. So we've unearthed those at the beginning. We want to talk about the keep, cut, convert. All right, so it's a great saying. We want to talk about what the technology is going to look like. What's the adoption and change management plan look like? What does the governance and compliance side of the house look like as well? And also show customers what the cost analysis is going to be. because it's important when you go into this that we don't have cost overrun and we understand where where we're going to have, what our spend is going to look like, and it's predictive. And I think finally, and most importantly of that plan, it's strategy alignment. We absolutely have to anchor any technology transformation back to strategy, because if we don't, we won't deliver business value at the end of it. And that's kind of fundamentally across all of those modules, that's what you're going to see. Looking at each of them individually, just high level. The first one we see on the top left is rapid service deployment. This one, the intention of this one is for a customer who feels fairly comfortable with the environment they've got. Maybe they don't have a lot of complexity. They want to go quickly. Maybe they have a hard deadline that they're trying to get to. And in this one, we kind of help customers to transform quickly, cost effectively, and move them along through that and going through a discovery process. This one's kind of in contrast to the other one, which is the Global Voice Designer Strategy, which is on the top right, which is for customers who go, well, hang on a minute, I've got an awful lot of complexity to unpack here. When we talk about some legacy PBX systems, it can blow your mind about how those things have been engineered. And this one is really looking at the low level to unpack all that, to audit it, to understand what it is, and map it to what is that going to look like in the future. So you've kind of got these two different options here that's really fit for the customer.
It's a little bit of that
moving
convert
to the bottom left. Absolutely. Within that one is, cut that. That's legacy. You don't need it anymore. This one's going to convert. We talk a lot about hybrid scenarios with customers where they maybe they've got two vendors in their long-term plans where you can't bring everything across from the legacy. So how do we merge the new and the old together while creating a really solid user experience? And that takes a lot of engineering hard work behind the scenes to make that transparent to the end users on the front end. So that one kind of contains a lot of that. Productivity and collaboration design is the next one, which is the bottom left. This one here talks about how do we improve the user experience from a productivity and collaboration position, looking at the way that we engage in meetings. Everyone's got meeting fatigue, and are we always using that in the best foot forward? Or are we just doing lots of meetings for the sake of it? So helping customers to understand that, using the technology to make them more efficient and to recognize that return on investment from their spend in that space. Looking at meeting spaces is also really critical, which we've already touched on. Another one that we've seen a lot of activity in over the last 12 months has been a renewed focus from organizations about digital events. How do I communicate to my organization in a wider perspective? It talks about how we collaborate, how do we drive productivity. So how do CEOs, CIOs, even how do businesses communicate to their customers? It's a very interesting topic for organizations, and it applies to many different people. And we can come in and we can help a marketing manager, or we could help an HR manager to understand what that strategy should look like and how they can leverage digital events to their maximum. The other one on here is also interesting is something it's kind of close to my heart, is accessibility and inclusion. Right, this is something that's is very, very important in the marketplace. When we're talking about more and more and more technology, are we thinking about everybody in the organization, or are we catering to the 95%? So how do we cater to that 5%, and how do we give them a voice in your organization and make sure everything is accessible and is inclusive as well? So that's that kind of module over there. The one at the bottom of the table then relates to secure workplace design, and this is for organizations who maybe financial services or healthcare providers, where security is absolutely paramount, and it's probably the number one factor in any transformation decision they make. So in here, we can look at the governance side of the house. We can look at compliance. We can look at security. We can take this as deep or as shallow as a customer would want. And it really just fits into that bucket. And then finally, the last one we can do is we talk about customer experience. So how you as an organization, how do you engage with your customers? How do you improve that experience? Predominantly, we talk a lot about contact center experiences and help customers to understand where they can optimize that to make it a smoother engagement model for them. And this is even more paramount in today's world, where again, the market has shifted after the pandemic, where people are saying, well, hang on, now I can actually do this all online and just call someone instead of going into the bank. That sounds much better, and I'll keep doing that behavior going forward. So this customer experience now becomes even more critical, and we're getting a lot of customers interested in talking to us more about that as well.
I love this framework. I think what you just went through is an entire 360 point of view of what someone needs to think about, both in terms of the planning, the implementation, and the end game. It's fantastic. I think it's really powerful. You know, this makes me think about one of the things that you and I connect on is we're both technologists at heart, right? And so one of the things that came out of our research was understanding what were some of the categories of technologies that were being implemented going forward. What was impactful? There was three areas that really bubbled up that were important in this process. In addition to the workplace communications, this is the idea that networks, that there was a sufficient networks to give people access to the applications that they're required to work. The other one was actually that there was these holistic systems in place to enable those remote workers. And this included a lot of the collaboration technology and inclusion technology that you talked about here as well, too. And then the last one, which is square on in that bottom one, is enterprises want to make sure they have the technologies in place for security, to de-risk, to remove risk from the process, to protect information, especially when dealing with this distributed workforce. I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of these type of technologies firsthand. Are there some examples that you have of successful or very impactful technology deployments that help enable any of these categories that I just mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. Just taking the network one first of all, there's two ways to kind of look at the network side of the house. We can talk about IP networks, and a lot of these engagements, customers have had to think about. I've got a much more distributed network today than I ever did. Right, home networks. You've got
Mm-hmm.
that nut to crack over there, which is a very very challenging one to make sure everyone's home networks are good. But one of the main things that we've noticed from the network side is um, everyone's gone and adopted this technology remote. And so organizations are now having to think about return to office. Well, everyone's using video and they weren't before. What is that going to do to my network when I bring everyone back in and we all start turning on video? Is my network
Right.
prepared? And so we see a lot of customers now really trying to get ahead of the curve on that, preparing their networks for when they get that full return to office. I also like to think about network, not just from an IP perspective, but also talking about it from how these technologies are allowing people to reach further into the business. How, in essence, how
Mm-hmm.
they're able to network closer to applications that matter to them. And I talk a little bit about this when I was talking about the workflows. But applications such as Microsoft Teams have so much power, and it's still fairly untapped today, because many companies are just getting themselves into the core modalities of Microsoft Teams for voice and meetings. But that power apps and that ability to bring business applications into that and improve workflows and how people communicate. To me, that's, again, I've mentioned it before, that's where I'm excited about where this technology is going, because that's where the business drivers and the business value is going to come from.
Right.
Generally speaking, in terms of just general collaboration, Microsoft, Cisco, and some other partners out in the ecosphere have absolutely proven their worth over the last 12 months. Sometimes I like to think about what happens if the pandemic happened 12 years ago. Where would we be, or 10 years ago? Where would we have been? A lot of stuff would have just ground to a halt. But the ability for organizations to adopt quickly into those technologies it's just been tremendous. And what I hope for out of the market now is when we do return to the office, we're a little bit more brazen in our ability to go and say, you know what, let's go and try some of this new technology coming out. And we're actually seeing that from customers today that may have taken another 12, 24, 36 months to maybe talk to us about, I want to move my
Right.
enterprise voice. They're like, let's do it, guys. We're there. We've already gone through all this. So what more can we throw at us? And that, I hope, is going to be an interesting shift in the market where there's an appetite for changing quickly, because we can always reference
Mm-hmm.
back to COVID and said, we did it for COVID successfully.
Right.
We can do it again. So it's kind of
I,
interesting.
I, I, I love that point of view. Actually, from some of the research we've done, we estimate that the adoption curve was dropped by 6 to 8 years because of what took place in this last 18 months, right? And it's really phenomenal if you think
Yep.
about the need for us to adopt because we're required to make sure we have business continuity, even just continuity among our lives. Communicating with family and friends, for example, is another way to think about this, right? It's
Yeah,
it
it's
does,
amazing.
but you're
6 to 8
interesting. You
years
just
we've got that. Hmm.
right, but you hit some really key technologies, and then as you're thinking about this, my mind was going, well, that's a lot going on there, right? Not these are important technologies, but there's many balls in the air, and you have to think about not only the deployment, but you have to think about the assessment, the planning, the purchasing. There's a lot of steps in this process, and then even once they're in place, there's actually the ongoing upkeep and management of these. But NTT has within its portfolio a combination of managed service cares as well as support services as well too. Why don't you share with me how that can play back into this?
Yeah, I think it's similar in concept to what we talked about the cloud deployment framework. At NTT, we're very conscious about customer fit.
Hmm.
So what we want to do on the terms of the support is we want to listen and understand where the customer is at today and where their end position is going to be, and then talk to them about
Okay.
their capabilities. So let's examine what your strengths and weaknesses are. And it's interesting. We find, sometimes I'll get a customer and I'm like, okay, they definitely need a managed service when I first start talking to them. But over time, as an example, they initially I look at it and I say, wow, super complex, really challenging environment. They're going to need help. But I get in there and I
Hmm.
start talking to them like, wow, you guys, you have people and resources that are really clued in on this technology. You've got an amazing support desk today. You probably don't need a managed service from us. You can have something which is a little
Oh.
bit less where we're a partner. And so there's an ability within our portfolio of support to say full managed services where we can do, we can supporting all your gateways, we can supporting your end users, proactive monitoring. There's a whole plethora of things that we can do there, but we can pull that back as well and say, actually, maybe you only need to call us on certain occasions. Maybe
Hmm.
there's a use case over here that you're not comfortable on. So
Oh
as
yeah,
part
I
of the
see.
cloud deployment framework, when we go through that planning, we are very conscious about designing the support model to fit our customer needs. Not just trying to just say, here's a support that we've got, you need to take this or not take it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
The
it does. It goes
the
back
other
to the idea of
thing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
the insights, the insights to drive what the solution is in the appropriate fit.
Yeah, the other thing I think it's also interesting point of view from NTT's position is that especially my team, we're in charge of advanced services here, and so we like to deploy stuff, and then we move on to our next customer. One of the things that my adoption team within the team here that's done a really good job of is is talking to customers and saying, well, that's true maybe of your project manager or of your solution architect, but it's not true of adoption because these
Hmm.
technologies are ever evolving. They continue to drive value. They continue to be creative in ways that there are things that we don't know today that maybe tomorrow. And so we talk to customers about um, think about the future. Keep your adoption program going. Engage change champions that can proliferate the knowledge across your organization as the platform grows. You grow with
Right.
it. We had a customer recently that we spoke to about, and we said, look, we're going to migrate you quickly, 3 months to do all their modalities for Microsoft Teams. And so the CIO, I said to him, let's treat the next 3 months as foundational. I'm doing a like for like. I'm bringing you across. I want to get you guys all settled. But it doesn't stop there. That's the beginning. What you're really targeting is another 12 months where you've grown now and you start to get things that you didn't have before and you start to
Right.
grow as a business into this application. And that really resonated with him. He was like, okay, when I put it like that, 3 months foundational, and then I'm going to continue to invest in this platform and the adoption. And that is what I would advise a lot of CIOs out there to start thinking about is how do you continue to grow into these applications that you use today?
I think that's a fantastic approach. The partnership approach really resonates in that model. There's even another area that I think you guys partner really well. One of the key things I really love about NTT is your a technology agnostic approach to finding the right solution for the customer. You cited two examples.
Yep.
You guys have a practice both with Microsoft Teams as well as Cisco WebEx collaboration technologies. But even beyond that, you have digital event technology also too. You have the ability to bring
Yep.
in the right fit for the situation or the problem assessment as opposed to leading with the technology
Yeah.
first. Is that a fair idea? I mean, am I capturing this right? What I hear you saying?
Oh, absolutely, and to be honest, it boggles my mind sometimes how many technologies that we were able to support and deliver on.
Yeah.
Um, but I would, yeah, what I would say, and you're right there. I would say that it's so important to kind of put technology second. especially in
Hmm.
today's environment. IT decision makers used to be able to work in a kind of little vacuum and say, all right, we're going to do this technology. That's not how the world works anymore. The
Hmm.
CFO is paying your budgets. They very much want to see business value, not just IT value. And
Hmm.
so the approach that NTT takes, and I think a lot of customers can align to this, is let's talk about those business values, the end user experience you're trying to generate, and then let's match that into a portfolio of technologies. And often for our largest enterprise customers, it's never one technology. It's always a multitude of technologies that have to come into play to service all these different use cases. So being flexible on that, and as you mentioned, it's beyond UC. We're talking with digital events. We talk about contact center, security, SD-WAN as it relates to that. There's a whole load of different stuff that can come into play here. So think business, think end user, then let's sort out the technology once we've got that figured out.
I think that's absolutely the best way, and actually, I think that's a great way for us to go ahead and wrap this up. So, Adam, allow me to remind the listeners again. We have taken this research that we've done, sponsored by NTT, and we've encapsulated it into an ebook. It's available at the URL you find there. We encourage you to go ahead and download this. Again, in the past, I've talked to another NTT colleague about in terms of gathering the insights. But here we had an opportunity to talk more about taking those insights and actually moving them forward into actionable plans and the technologies that you may see taking place. Adam, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your insights. And again, I appreciate that you were able
Yep.
to be honest with us about what you guys can provide.
Yep. Well, thanks for having me, Craig, and very insightful stuff that you guys have got. So appreciate that. Have a good day.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We look forward to talking to you again. Take care.